Hello boys and girls, I hope you're doing really well. So today we are going to be looking at Advent block number 3. And if you can remember, the first Advent block that we looked at the story of Genesis and the beginning of the world. In our second Advent block, we looked at the story of Noah and the flood. And today we're going to be looking at another story, the story of Abraham. Now, usually you would have your stories read from a storybook, and today isn't any different. We are going to be reading from my big storybook. Look how big that is. This is my Bible. And we are going to be looking at God's pretty crazy promise. So after the big flood in Noah's time, things got a wee bit better. But not completely. Over the years, as the number of people grew in the beautiful world that God had made, so did the amount of darkness and sin. God had a plan, and he was going to do something about it. He was going to prepare a way to be with his people again forever. But he wouldn't do it the same way that he did in Noah's time with the flood. This time, God would use the best part of his creation, and that was his people. He started with an old man, and his name was Abraham. "Abraham," God said, "I know you don't have any kids yet, but one day you're going to have a huge family. In fact, you'll have as many people in your family as there are stars in the sky." Abraham looked up at the night sky. He didn't even try counting. After all, do you know how many stars are in the sky? There are a lot. More than 100. More than 1,000. More than 1,000,000 stars. More than even 100,000 million. Now that is a lot. This seemed like a pretty crazy promise God was making. After all, Abraham was nearly 100 years old, and his wife Sarah was 90. A lot older than the age people usually have babies. Abraham and Sarah laughed at the thought of it. But even the promise seemed crazy. Abraham believed what God had said, and God was with Abraham. Even though Abraham was too old to have children, even though his wife was too old to have children, even when Abraham started to doubt God's promise, God was still with Abraham. Sure enough, just as God had promised, Sarah got pregnant. She had a baby in her tummy, and she gave birth to a baby boy called Isaac. And Isaac means son of laughter. Abraham and Sarah both laughed again. But this time they weren't laughing at God. They were laughing with God. It was like a little glimpse of heaven had started to break through. God told Abraham to do other scary things too, like leave his home and go to a brand new place that he had never even been before. But this time Abraham listened, and he did what God had told him to do. But Abraham didn't always trust God fully. He didn't always listen right away. He did things that made God's heart sad. He sinned in ways that hurt other people. Because of sin, the birth of one of Abraham's great-great-great-grandchildren would change everything forever. And one day, God would come back to stay.